The first time I saw the animatronic Santa Claus was in early December, on a gray afternoon in Dayton, Ohio, the kind where the sky feels like a low ceiling and the sunlight can't decide if it exists or not. Emily and I walked into a huge home improvement store because she wanted to buy poinsettias for the living room, and I had promised to replace the handles on the kitchen cabinets. Adult promises. Small things that turn into big tasks when you get home tired. The store smelled like cut wood, new plastic, and a bit of fertilizer. The ceiling lights were white and way too bright, making everything look like a hospital. The long shelves, the smooth floors, the colorful signs hanging high up. The kind of place where you go in to buy a wrench and end up leaving with a ladder, because you saw a sale and forgot why you came in. Near the entrance, there was a whole aisle of Christmas decorations. On the radio, a very upbeat version of an old song was playing, and I thought without much feeling that it was way too early for that. On a platform covered in fake snow, sitting on a red throne, was the robotic Santa Claus. When we walked past the security sensors, he lifted one arm and waved. The movement was stiff, like someone had taped his joints in place. The face was big and pink, with shiny cheeks and a neatly combed white beard. But the skin had a strange texture. It wasn't smooth plastic, it was almost like real skin. Just wrong. Like an expensive doll trying too hard to look human and going too far. I said to Emily, almost without thinking, "What a creepy Santa." She looked, snorted a laugh, and said, "Yeah, he looks like he came out of a kid's nightmare." Santa turned his head toward us and his eyes moved. But it wasn't a normal look. They didn't just go straight to us and stop. They darted from side to side like they were searching for something in the air, like the robot was trying to remember where we were. Then, for a second, he stopped and stared at me. It was quick, but it was long enough for me to feel that chill on the back of my neck, the same one you feel when you realize someone is watching you from the other side of the bus. The difference was that I was being watched by something that shouldn't be watching anything. Right after that, the eyes drifted away again, going back to those meaningless movements. The arm lowered and he stood still as if nothing had happened. I wanted to say it was just my imagination, that it was just cheap programming, but the store was big, and I know this kind of animatronic well. They usually do a repeated motion. Turn this way, wave, say a line, all with a steady rhythm. That one had no rhythm. It seemed to fail and fix itself at the same time, like a video glitching. Emily grabbed my arm and gently pulled me toward the garden section. "Let's get the poinsettias and leave. You're going to stare at this guy all day." "That's not it," I said quietly, as if Santa could hear. I don't know." His eyes move weird. "Alex, it's just a robot." I wanted to agree because it was the most sensible answer, and I'm a sensible person. I pay bills, buy groceries, remember to change the air filter at the right time. I don't make up supernatural stuff in the middle of a store. Still, as we walked away, I looked over my shoulder one last time. Santa was still there, and his face seemed turned a little more in my direction than before, as if he had kept following me after I stopped looking. In the garden section, the air was more humid, and the plants made the place feel like a greenhouse. Emily picked up 2 red poinsettias and put them in the cart. I went to look at the cabinet handles, checking out the models lined up on hooks. Brushed nickel, bronze, matte black. Simple things, organized, easy to understand. Unlike that frozen expression on Santa's face. We passed by succulents, tiny cacti, and a row of moon cacti, the ones that look like they have a colorful flower on top. "Look," I said, trying to change the subject. "Same as the one we bought last year." Emily made a face. "You know that's just 2 cacti stuck together, right?" "What do you mean?" "They cut one and glue the other on top." Boom. Moon cactus. She said it like she was sharing some ancient secret, and I laughed, relieved to have something normal to think about. We kept walking. We talked about dinner, about a show we were watching, about how the cold had come earlier that year. Little things that fill a marriage and make the world feel like it has an axis. When we finished, we headed back to the registers, passing through the decoration area again, and Santa was still sitting on the throne. He waved again, with the same stiffness. Only this time, I really paid attention. His eyes moved differently. First, they looked to the opposite side, then slid over to me and stopped. Not for just a random second. They stopped like they were stuck in a decision. And for a moment I had this absurd feeling that he was sizing me up. Not like a toy, like someone recognizing a face. The feeling was so out of place that my brain did what it always does. Tried to fix it. Maybe the light hit wrong. Maybe I looked at just the right point in the cycle. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I was looking for something to complain about. Emily nudged me. "You okay? You look like you saw a ghost." "I'm fine," I answered quickly. "I just want to go home." At the register, while the cashier rang up the handles and the poinsettias, I could still feel that impression stuck to me, like the smell of smoke on clothes. When we left, the cold wind hit my face and I took a deep breath, thankful for the freezing air. In the parking lot, Emily put the plants in the back seat and I stood still for a second, staring at the store sign and the automatic doors opening and closing, swallowing people and carts. I said, trying to make a joke, "Who buys a Santa like that?" Emily shrugged. "Someone who thinks it's funny, or some store trying to get attention." She got in the car and turned on the heater. I got in too. We drove off and the world went back to its regular size. No weird eyes, no broken movements, no feeling like I'd been picked at random. That night, at home, I installed the new handles, and Emily placed the poinsettias by the window. The living room looked like December. The TV was playing a silly movie, and I almost managed to forget about Santa. Almost. Because when I went to bed, before turning off the light, I caught myself remembering that one specific second when he stared at me. And I thought of something I shouldn't think. Something simple and dumb that doesn't fit an adult. A robot shouldn't be able to make someone feel seen. 2 weeks after that trip to the store, I was back in the same place, only now wearing a red vest with a name tag that said Alex Harper. Life has a funny way of closing circles a little too fast. I got laid off from my last job at the end of November, budget cuts, and the home improvement store was hiring temps for the holidays. It wasn't the plan, but it was money coming in. Emily tried to stay positive. She said it was temporary, that it would go by fast, that at least it was close to home. I agreed with everything because disagreeing wouldn't change a thing. On my first day, I got there early. The parking lot was still half empty, the cold air cutting my face. When I walked in through the automatic doors, the smell of the store hit me again, just like the first time. Wood, plastic, clean dust. And there he was. The animatronic Santa was still in the same spot, on the same throne, on the same platform covered in fake snow. For a second, I thought he wasn't turned on. Then the arm lifted, and he waved. I stopped without meaning to, looked around. No one was paying attention. 2 people walked by with carts. A middle-aged worker sipped coffee near the entrance. Santa turned his head slowly. The eyes moved. I told myself I was just looking for something that wasn't there. After all, I'd be seeing that thing every day. The brain learns to create patterns when it's bored. I kept walking. The first few days, my job was simple. Restock shelves, organize boxes, answer basic customer questions. Where's the paint aisle? Is this heater on sale? That kind of thing. I mostly stayed near the front of the store, which meant walking past Santa several times a shift. And I started noticing small details. Nothing big. Nothing you could point at and say, that's impossible. But details that didn't add up. Sometimes when I walked by, Santa was facing the other direction. Sometimes he seemed to be looking right at me. I tested this by accident, walking fast, then slow. In some moments, his eyes seemed to follow me longer than before. I told Emily about it one night over dinner. "Maybe he just has better motion sensors," she said. "These things are pretty advanced now." "Yeah, that's probably it," I said, though I wasn't really sure. My shift supervisor was Mark Reynolds. He looked to be in his early 30s, hair always too neat, smile always practiced. He talked to everyone like he was doing them a favor, called everyone buddy and man, but always in a tone that reminded you who was in charge. "We need flexibility this time of year, Alex," he told me on the 3rd day. "The holidays are busy. Sometimes you'll need to stay a little longer." A little longer quickly became the norm. My shift, which was supposed to end at 11 p.m., often stretched to 1, 2 in the morning. The store felt different at that hour. Less noise, fewer voices, more empty space between the shelves. The lights were still bright, but they didn't seem to reach every corner. It was during those late shifts that I got to know Ethan Cole better. He worked in the stockroom, mostly overnight. He was skinny, wore glasses, spoke quietly. But once he started explaining something technical, he wouldn't stop. I found out during some random conversation that he had studied engineering in Boston, at a well-known university. I thought it was odd that he was there. "Life doesn't always follow the plan," he said, shrugging. "At least this place pays the bills." One night, while we were stacking boxes of Christmas lights, I nodded toward the store entrance. "That Santa is intense," I said. Ethan smiled in a different way, kind of proud. "He's mine." "What do you mean?" "I built him. I mean, the prototype." The store wanted something eye-catching. I'd had the project sitting around for a while. That explained a few things, at least in theory. "He moves too much for a store display," I said. "He was made to walk," Ethan replied. "But they thought it was scary, told me to limit the movements. Sitting, waving, more friendly." Friendly wasn't the word I'd use. I asked if he ran on batteries. "He does, but he's also plugged in," he explained. "There's redundancy." Redundancy. The word stuck with me. As the days went by, other things started to happen. Nothing you could really call an event, just small changes. One night shift worker stopped showing up. They said he quit. Then another one. Mark complained that it was hard to keep the schedule together, that nobody was committed anymore. The hours got longer. Sometimes the store took longer to close than usual, like there was always just one more thing to do. The automatic doors seemed slower at night. Nothing fully broke, but everything felt like it took a little longer than it should. And Santa stayed right there. One night, close to midnight, I walked past the entrance pushing an empty cart. I was sure he was turned off. The music had stopped. The movement was gone. As I passed him, I heard a soft mechanical sound, like a motor waking up. The eyes moved. I stopped, looked at the power cord. It was plugged in, but the side switch looked off. Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe someone had touched it, cut it out, I muttered, more to myself than anything else. I kept walking. I started feeling like the store watched me more when it was empty. Not like something conscious, but like a space that reacted to presence. The sound of my footsteps felt different depending on the aisle. Sometimes I had the feeling someone was right behind me, and when I turned, there was no one there. I didn't tell anyone about this. Tiredness explains a lot. Stress too. But every time my shift ended too late, and I walked past Santa on my way out, I felt the same thing I'd felt the first time. That light, almost ridiculous impression that I was being noticed. Not threatened, not followed, just counted. As the weeks went by, I started to realize it wasn't just the store that changed at night. I was changing too, even if I didn't want to admit it. The tiredness became constant, like a low hum that never shut off. I slept, but I woke up feeling like I'd been awake all night. Emily said I was quieter, more distracted. I told her it was just work. Maybe it was. My shifts kept getting longer. Sometimes I'd look at the clock and swear only 10 minutes had passed, when it had actually been almost an hour. Other times it felt like the opposite. I blamed it on the repetitive routine, the identical shelves, the aisles that seemed to never end. I started noticing strange sounds. Nothing loud, nothing obvious. A distant dragging noise like boxes being moved. A dry click, like a switch being flipped. Whenever I stopped to listen, the sound didn't repeat. When I walked over to check, nothing was out of place. One night, I was in the power tools aisle when I heard something behind me. Footsteps. Clear. Slow. I turned around, already ready to complain to some coworker for scaring me for no reason. The aisle was empty. Too long. Too quiet. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to figure out if I'd imagined it. The brain is good at filling in gaps, especially when you're tired. I went back to work and forced the thought away. But that feeling of being watched started showing up more often. It wasn't straight-up fear. It was something simpler and more uncomfortable. The sense that I wasn't alone, even when I knew I was. One early morning, I walked past the seasonal section and felt a sharp chill, like the air was colder there. I looked toward the entrance. Santa was on the throne, motionless. I was absolutely sure he was turned off. No movement, no sound. Even so, I had the clear feeling that he knew I was there. The next day I told Emily about it, trying to keep my tone light. "I think I'm getting paranoid," I said, messing with my breakfast. She frowned. "You've been working too much, Alex. That messes with your head." "I know," I answered too quickly. "That's all it is." I wanted it to be just that. A few days later, Mark Reynolds' name started coming up in a strange way. It wasn't direct gossip, it was absence. He just didn't show up for work. On the first day, they said he'd called in sick. On the second, that he had to deal with some personal stuff. On the third, no one said anything. When I asked another supervisor, he shrugged. He probably quit. It happens. It happens. The words echoed in my head. Mark didn't seem like the kind of person who disappeared without warning. He liked control too much, liked being on top. Around the same time, I started seeing less of Ethan. He was always around before, even at weird hours. Suddenly, he wasn't. When I asked about him, the answer was vague. I think he switched shifts, but no one could tell me which shift. The nights got quieter after that. Too quiet. The store felt bigger, the aisles longer. I started avoiding walking past the entrance alone, even though I knew it didn't make sense. Sometimes I had strange lapses. I remembered starting a task, but not finishing it. I'd find boxes stacked the way I always did it, but I didn't remember stacking them. It was like someone was finishing the work for me, or like I was running on autopilot. I started to wonder if I was sleeping right, if I was eating enough, if stress was messing with my memory. All of that seemed more logical than any other explanation. One night, while pushing an empty cart, I heard a low sound, almost like a distant laugh. It wasn't clear, it wasn't loud, it was short. I stopped, waited, nothing. "Cut it out," I said quietly. Talking to myself was becoming a habit. I didn't like that. Not long after, 2 police officers showed up at the store during my shift. Dark uniforms, calm posture. They asked to speak with me. My stomach sank for no clear reason. They took me to the office and asked simple questions. When was the last time I saw Mark Reynolds? What he looked like? If he had said anything unusual? I answered everything honestly. I didn't know anything. They asked about Ethan too. I said he worked nights, that he was an engineer, that he seemed quiet but normal. They wrote everything down. They didn't look surprised. That bothered me more than any question. "Just procedure," one of them said, like he was reading my thoughts. After they left, the store felt even emptier. After that, no one mentioned Mark or Ethan, not officially. It was like they had been erased from the routine. New names showed up on the schedule, people I didn't know, people who also seemed way too tired. I started doubting myself more often. Sometimes I was sure I'd heard something, and seconds later, I wasn't so sure. Sometimes I'd walk past Santa and get the clear feeling he was looking right at me. But when I looked again, his eyes were facing another direction. I tested it once, walked by fast, then slow, then stopped on purpose. The eyes moved, but in a way that always left room for doubt. There was always a possible explanation. Always. That was the worst part. Nothing was ever strong enough to prove something was wrong. Everything stayed in that uncomfortable space between maybe and definitely not. I didn't feel crazy. I felt tired, confused, like my mind was trying to keep up with a rhythm I didn't understand. The store kept running, customers kept coming and going. Santa kept waving at kids during the day. And I kept telling myself every night that all of this had a simple explanation, even when deep down I wasn't so sure anymore. After a while, I stopped trying to decide if something was wrong and started observing how things happened. It wasn't a conscious choice. It was more like an adaptation. When you spend too many hours in a place that doesn't make sense, your brain tries to create order on its own. The first rule became clear without anyone having to tell me. Santa only moved when I was alone. During the day, with customers walking around, kids running, parents complaining about the price of Christmas lights, he worked like any normal animatronic. He waved, slowly turned his head, repeated pre-recorded lines. Nothing out of the ordinary. If I walked by during those times, the eyes moved in a predictable, almost boring way. At night, it was different. Not right away. He didn't start moving the moment the store closed. There was a gap. There always was. First, the customers left. Then the night shift staff thinned out, one by one. And before I realized it, I was the only one left in a space way too big for just one person. That's when something changed. Not in a sudden way, not like in the movies. Just small adjustments. An arm that lifted a little quicker than before. A head that turned a few degrees past normal. Eyes that didn't go back to their starting position after following me. I tested this more than once, without admitting to myself that I was testing it. On nights when someone else was around, nothing happened. On nights when I was alone for too long, the movements began. The second rule came soon after. The later the shift, the more active he got. When I left at midnight, Santa barely moved. When I stayed until 2 in the morning, the movements were more frequent. On nights that went past 3, I noticed clear changes. The sound of the motors was louder. The response time got shorter. It was like he was slowly waking up. The third rule was about sound. The ho-ho-ho wasn't random. At first I thought it was a glitch. Then I realized it always came right before something changed. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was more like a marker. A signal that something had been updated. If I heard the soft laugh, I knew some detail had shifted. Sometimes it was just the position of his body. Sometimes it was the focus of his gaze. Sometimes it was something in the store. Yes, the store. I started to notice the space followed patterns too. The automatic doors took longer to open after midnight. They didn't jam. They just hesitated, like they were waiting for something to finish before doing their job. The aisles felt longer when I was too tired. I measured them by counting steps. It was almost always the same number. Almost. Sometimes a few more. Never fewer. The security cameras were always on. I saw the monitors in the office. When I asked about old footage, the answer was simple. They tend to glitch at night, they said. Nothing major, nothing major. Everything was always nothing major. What bothered me most was that all of it worked. There was no chaos, no visible error. It was like a well-tuned system that just wasn't built for people to understand. I tried to break the rules. One night I stayed near the entrance on purpose, even after the last worker left. I stood still, messing with my phone, pretending I wasn't paying attention. Santa stayed motionless for several minutes. When I put the phone away and looked straight at him, his eyes moved instantly. Another night, I left the main area and stayed in the stockroom waiting to hear something. Nothing happened. When I went back to the front of the store, I heard the low laugh almost immediately. It was a response, not a random reaction. I tried to explain it to myself in a logical way. Maybe sensors, maybe advanced programming, maybe Ethan's work was better than I thought. But even that didn't explain everything. Sensors don't choose times. Programs don't adjust behavior based on human isolation. Or do they? That question followed me for days. I stopped talking about it with Emily. Not because she wouldn't believe me, but because I didn't know how to explain it without sounding extreme. I wasn't even sure myself what I was seeing. I just knew there was consistency. And consistency is the opposite of a hallucination. The strangest part was that I didn't feel direct fear. I felt a tension, like something was responding to my presence in a technical way, not an emotional one. I wasn't a target. I was a variable. There was one night when I arrived early and found the store almost empty. I walked past the entrance and noticed Santa was turned off. Not just still, actually off. The power cord was unplugged. I went back to the stockroom, worked for a while, and when I returned, the cord was plugged in again. There was no one else there besides me. I didn't think about running. I didn't think about danger. I thought about process. Who plugs something like that back in for no reason? Why? At what moment? The answers didn't come, but the sense of a system got stronger. With Mark and Ethan gone, the rules didn't change. That mattered. If they had been the center of everything, something would have broken. But it didn't. The store kept going. Santa kept going. The shifts kept getting longer. That led me to a simple, uncomfortable conclusion. People weren't essential. They were replaceable, adjustable, removable. The system didn't depend on individuals. It depended on conditions. Alone, tired, too late. Those were the keys. There was no clear evil, no intention I could understand. There was only operation. Like a machine doing exactly what it was built to do, even if no one remembers what the original goal was. When I started seeing it that way, something changed in me. I didn't get more anxious, I got focused, like someone who realizes they're inside an experiment but doesn't know what the question is. The store didn't feel wrong. Santa didn't feel broken. The problem was something else. All of it was working correctly, just not for us. On the night everything finally changed, I already knew I'd be alone. Not because anyone told me, but because the pattern repeated itself. Just like always. One worker left early, saying he wasn't feeling well. Another said he got an urgent call. When I checked the time, it was already past 1 a.m., and I was the only person in the entire store. I didn't feel surprised, just tired. The store was too clean, too quiet. The white lights gave everything a cold glow, almost without shadows. I pushed a cart down the seasonal aisle, organizing boxes of decorations no one wanted anymore so close to Christmas. The sound of the wheels echoed loudly, like the space had grown bigger. I passed by the entrance and looked toward the spot where Santa used to sit. The throne was empty. No figure, no fallen platform, nothing out of place. Just the clean space, still covered in fake snow, like he'd never been there. I stopped without meaning to, gripping the cart tightly. My first thought was simple: someone took him for maintenance. The second thought came right after. There was no one left to do that. The air felt colder near the entrance. I looked around, expecting to see the figure somewhere down an aisle, unplugged, leaning against a wall. I didn't see anything. The store was too big to search without reason, so I moved on, trying to stick to the routine. That's when I heard the sound. Footsteps. They weren't close. They were coming from the back of the store where the stockroom was. Slow, heavy, steady, not in a hurry. I stood still, listening, trying to decide if it made sense. Maybe the ventilation system. Maybe some automatic machine. Then I heard the laugh. Low, short, mechanical. Ho ho ho. The sound echoed through the empty aisles, emotionless, like a neutral warning. My stomach tightened, but my mind kept working in a strange, almost calm way. I didn't think about running. I thought about confirming. I pushed the cart toward the sound. Every step felt louder than usual. The lights were still on, but something was wrong with them, like they weren't reaching everything at once. Some areas always seemed just a little bit darker. The footsteps got clearer. They were coming from the large tools aisle, where the axes, shovels, and saws were kept. When I turned the corner, I saw the animatronic Santa standing in the middle of the aisle. He was standing. He never had before. His legs were straight, stiff, but holding his weight. His arms hung at his sides. His head was up and his eyes were locked on me, unmoving. There was no error in them now. No doubt. He was looking straight at me. In his right hand, he held an axe with a wooden handle. The blade still had a tag hanging from it. The laugh came again, louder this time. Ho ho ho. I took a step back without thinking. My foot hit the cart and the noise seemed to wake up the space around me. Santa took a step forward. The movement was heavy but steady. He knew exactly how to walk. That's when I noticed something was wrong with the face. The white beard was stained with dark red. It wasn't paint. It dripped slowly, hitting the floor. The mouth moved in a strange way, like something was pulling the corners from the inside. The mask started to give. It didn't fall off all at once. It shifted bit by bit, revealing a human face underneath. I recognized it before I could even accept it. It was Mark Reynolds. His eyes were open too wide, held in place by metal wires. The mouth was forced into a smile, pulled by parts that disappeared into his skin. The mechanical laugh came out along with a low sound, almost like a muffled groan. I didn't scream. I couldn't. Santa, no, the system, took another step. The axe lifted slightly, not in attack but like an adjustment. I understood in that moment that it wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge, it was use. Something inside that thing needed human parts to function like that. My mind connected the dots too quickly. Ethan disappearing, his knowledge, the creation of the figure, people who weren't essential being integrated into something bigger. I turned and ran. Footsteps followed right behind me, faster than I expected. The laugh echoed again, not as a marker now, but as accompaniment. I shoved a shelf as I ran past without thinking. It wobbled but didn't fall. I reached the decorations aisle and shoved one of the tall shelves hard. It crashed down with a loud thud, bringing boxes, lights, and display figures with it. The impact was heavy. Santa went down with it, his body breaking in all the wrong ways, limbs caught at impossible angles. The head came loose and rolled across the floor, stopping near my feet. The eyes were still moving. They looked at me for a second that lasted too long. There was no plea, no threat, just recognition. Like that human part understood what was happening, even if it couldn't stop it. I ran without looking back. I left the store through the automatic doors that took an eternity to open. The cold, early morning air hit me hard, and I kept running to the car, barely feeling the ground. I didn't call anyone that night. I went home, took a shower, scrubbed my hands until the skin burned. Emily asked what had happened. I told her it had been a rough shift. She didn't push. The next day, the store opened like normal. The news mentioned missing employees in different places. Nothing was officially linked to the store. Santa wasn't at the entrance anymore. Some of the decorations were gone too. I understood, without anyone having to say it, that this hadn't been a mistake. It was an update. After that night, I never went back to the store. Not the next day. Not the next week. Not ever. I turned my phone off for 2 full days, ignored messages, and slept as much as I could, even when the sleep came broken, full of confused dreams and hallways that were way too long. When I finally turned the phone back on, there were missed calls, messages from unknown numbers. None mentioned the police. None mentioned what I had seen. They were all about work. "We need to talk about your schedule. You didn't let us know you wouldn't be coming in. Please contact the manager." There was a new manager now, a name I didn't recognize. Everything seemed to have been reorganized way too fast. Emily could tell something was wrong, even without me saying anything. She watched me while I drank coffee, while I stood still staring out the window. I wanted to explain, but there were no right words. "How do you say that something works better when people disappear? You're not going back there, right?" she asked one night. "No," I answered without hesitation. She didn't push. I think deep down she knew that answer was final. The days passed. December ended. Christmas came and went. The city decorations slowly disappeared. The lights were turned off. Winter stayed heavy in Dayton, with dirty snow piling up along the sidewalks. I tried to move on. I got another job, something temporary at a roadside diner. Short shifts, too many people, constant noise. It was the opposite of the store, and that helped keep my head straight. I needed places where the world felt messy but alive. Even so, some things wouldn't leave my mind. I started paying more attention to big stores, supermarkets, malls, warehouses, places where people come and go without being noticed, where no one really notices if an employee disappears, as long as the register keeps working. I began to notice small news stories in local papers, night shift workers missing, shifts abandoned in the middle of the night. Nothing officially connected to anything. There was always a possible explanation: moving away, personal problems, lack of evidence. The home improvement store stayed open. I drove by once, weeks later, just to be sure. I parked across the street and watched. The front looked the same. The sign lit up, people going in and out with full carts. Nothing seemed out of place. There was no Santa at the entrance. In his place, there was a huge inflatable snowman. Big smile, simple plastic eyes. It swayed in the wind, tied down with ropes. It looked safe, simple, harmless. But I knew better now. It was never about Santa. It never was. It was about the system accepting it, about allowing something to adjust itself using people as spare parts. about how easy it is for everything to keep working as long as no one asks too many questions. One afternoon, I got another call from the store. I didn't answer. Then an email came in. They said they were short-staffed on the night shift, that they would pay more, that it would be temporary. I deleted the message without replying. Sometimes when I'm home alone late at night, I hear sounds that remind me of the store. A dry click, a low hum. Nothing that doesn't have a logical explanation, but just enough to keep me alert. Emily says I get tense around Christmas now. I smile and say it's just the cold. It's easier that way. What bothers me most isn't what I saw that night. It's what came after. Nothing changed. There was no serious investigation, no store shutdown, no public warning. People disappeared and were replaced. The space was reorganized. The roles kept going. The system didn't fail. It adapted. Sometimes I think about Ethan, about what he created, if he had any idea where it would end up, if at some point he realized the creation didn't need him anymore, that he could be integrated too. Other times I think about Mark, about his face trapped inside something that needed to smile, not as punishment, as use. Those thoughts don't make me scream, don't make me run. They just stay there, taking up space. I learned something important after all of this. Horror doesn't need to hide. It doesn't have to dress up as something supernatural. It can work within the rules, as long as no one looks too closely, as long as there are long shifts, as long as there are tired people, as long as there are spaces too big for one person alone. The system will keep finding parts. I survived because I left, because I stepped out of the pattern before I became part of it. Not everyone gets that chance. Not everyone notices in time. If you work night shifts in a place like that, pay attention. Not to what seems wrong, but to what works too well. Watch who disappears. Watch what gets replaced without a word. And above all, be suspicious when everything stays normal. Because the scariest thing isn't when something breaks. It's when everything keeps working like nothing ever happened.